Acknowledgements. This book.
Alright, this is my live commentary to the book Prisoner of Infinity while I highlight and organize some more book reports. That's the plan for today. I gotta get my hair done. Gotta take a shower. Gotta do a lot of stuff. But first, we are entering the Panopticon. So let's get started. This will be the first 25 minutes. So starting with acknowledgements, I'll stop and have a conversation each point I feel like doing that.
Acknowledgements. This book, though one work with a single voice, is largely the result of dialogues. It has come about through exchanges with other parties' exchanges that intensified my interest in and deepened my commitment to getting to grips with this material. These exchanges began long before I started the book. They began when I first read Whitley Strieber's Communion and found his accounts dialoguing with my own beliefs, dreams, and memories. Strieber was the original snowflake that started the ball rolling, and since there would be no exploration without that initial impetus, my first thanks must go to him. Strieber has resisted my attempts at having an actual dialogue with him, and what little he has communicated to me over the years suggests he does not support this present work. Interestingly, much of my inspiration for this book has been ostensibly adversarial. I first wrote about Strieber in 2008 and again in 2010, and it was an online attack on me by the now defunct Mother Strangled website that was also analyzing Strieber's work. It first prompted me to take another closer look at Strieber in 2013. My contact with Jeffrey J. Kripple sparked the thesis and first chapter of this book, and once again I found myself in opposition to Krippel's views. Ditto, to a lesser extent, with the feedback of Peter Levenda, whose attempts to refute my arguments about alien abduction, annoying as they were, helped me to fine-tune them. The main dialogue or contributor was my wife. She read each installment as I wrote it, and invariably sent numerous articles and book citations to deepen, expand, or explode points I was addressing. More than any other single factor, her musings led to the size and scope of the present work. Thanks also to those who read early drafts of the book and participated in dialogues for the Crucial Fictions podcast. Phil Snyder, Keith Savatsky, Sleepy Tim, Doug Lane, Julian West, and later on, Louis Proud and Mark Ehrman. Also thanks to Ty Brown for his groundbreaking research and to Lily Pett for her inside view of the honeypot. There are others whose attention and interest helped keep the snowball rolling, and I offer both thanks and apologies to all those I have not named. Lastly, my thanks to Gary Height, an anomaly among agents, and to Rod Tweedy and Eon for having the courage of conviction to midwife this strange hybrid life form into literary and literal existence and risk the wrath of our overlords. Jason Horsley, 2017. Quotes from the following works are reproduced by permission. Communion, A True Story by Whitley Strieber, 1987, from Souvenir Press. Psychic Research, A Challenge to Science by Edgar Mitchell, from Cosimo Books, 2011. Aspects of the Masculine, 2015, by C.G. Introduction. Conditioned to believe? Is it possible for us to actually disappear into our own imagination? Whitley Strieber, 1988. First up, for the unfamiliar reader, a few words about the principal human subject of this book. Whitley Strieber was born in San Antonio in 1945, of German descent. He went to Catholic school. He studied at the University of Texas London Film School and London School of Economics. He somehow managed to graduate from all three in 1968, an especially mysterious year in Strieber's life, as we will see. He studied at the Gurdjieff Foundation and entered the world of New York advertising in the early 1970s. A press kit for his 1990 novel Majestic said, before he became a writer, Strieber worked first in the newspaper business, then in the film business, and finally in the advertising industry, leaving in 1978 as a vice president. 1978 was the year he published his first novel, The Wolfen, which became a bestseller and was turned into a Hollywood movie in 1981, the year he published The Hunger, which also became a Hollywood movie. Both books were about a hidden, supernatural, highly intelligent predator that sees humans as its rightful prey. Strieber's younger brother, Richard, had by then become a lawyer like their father, Carl. Though Strieber was successful, he turned his back on his worldly career to dedicate himself to what I can only assume was his passion, and return to the world of the imagination. I say return because, according to Strieber, he wrote his first story when he was 6. It was about the moon. By 1983, with the release of the Hunger film with David Bowie, He was at the top of his game as an author of horror fiction. His follow-up novels, Black Magic, about government attempts to harness psychic energy, and The Night Church, about a satanic cult, were less successful, and in 1984 he entered into quasi-non-fiction terrain with War Day, written with James Kunetka, about the aftermath of nuclear war. In an article he wrote for MUFON in 1986, My Experience with the Visitors, Strieber drew a clear line between his two types of writing. Before War Day, I published 4 entertainment novels. While these were horror novels, I have certainly never been a believer in the occult. My important books concern problems of the real world and are based on carefully researched fact. The reason Strieber was writing for MUFON was this. In 1986, he released his most famous and successful book, Communion, a true story. The book recounts Strieber's alleged experiences of alien abduction that began consciously in late 1985. Though in the book and its many sequels, he claims to have experienced alien contact throughout his life, starting in his early childhood, but to have suppressed all memory of it until the breakthrough event of 1985. As a result of this breakthrough event, Strieber the writer was propelled headlong, literally screaming, into the chapel perilous of fantastic nonfiction, a rarefied domain he shared with Carlos Castanet, but precious few others. At this time, the line he had drawn between his entertainment horror novels and his important, carefully researched books was effectively erased. Strieber's horror fiction spilled over into his life.
So, one thing I want to think about Strieber for is looking into his specific past is very intriguing explicitly because Strieber is a person who went to film school, studied economics. He got out of all three around 68, so that's like Nixon getting us off the gold standard, which is very, very big. And he also studied at the Gurdjieff Foundation and entered New York advertising very explicitly. So it's kind of like this is a mix of kind of the supernatural and Mad Men in the way that he can create a desiring obfuscation to allow him to integrate it's very similar to Nick Land's understanding of like an a priori of the unknown, and that's what the alien symbol represents to a certain degree. That's what I'm thinking about very specifically. So he graduated and for all three in 1968. His books specifically, he's a man of German descent. Let's keep that in mind. Around 1945, I'm not sure if he's Jewish at all. That's something to look into. Not in an anti-Semitic way, but more so within the structuring of what does he see the inside-outside dichotomy as, specifically tied to his religious beliefs. Because he did go to Catholic school. Like, I'm not saying that he is Jewish. I'm saying that what being Jewish as the person of German descent means, specifically within the cult stuff that's going to be brought up later, is kind of interesting. Like, I don't want to put any implications on that though, so I'm just going to leave that there. I'll have to look into what his novels The Wolfen, which was a bestseller, so let's see why, when, and what has it affected. The Hunger, which Hollywood got into, so what interest was put into him after he got into Hollywood, very specifically, because Bowie, a lot of avant-garde, a lot of interesting circles. And they all have a hidden, supernatural, highly intelligent predator that sees humans as his rightful prey. This reminds me more so of Nick Land than I think people can bring resonance to. He has the other one is Black Magic, about government attempts to harness psychic energy, so autistic research, trauma research, and child abuse, child sacrifice structures. The Night Church, exact same thing. Let's keep that in mind for understanding the alien territory within the human experiment and understanding of the world that he grew up in, because he specifically was born in 1945. There's a lot of things he could have been caught up into. He says he has two different types of writing, so it seems that he has a split personality. That's something very big to think about within a lot of contemporary understandings of child sacrifice or the spider trauma trope, say like Spider-Man or Yugi from Yu-Gi-Oh, where an orphan who already lost his mom and dad is living with his extended family and loses them. I'm not saying that's what he's going through, but I'm saying that there's a structure of alienation that causes the split personality that can elicit two different styles of writing. One, which is for entertainment, while the other are specifically a cult, and not a cult in the, like, how do I phrase it? A cult following for people who believe in aliens and people who believe in this kind of scientific message, which I'm going to listen to the book more so that I can make sure I'm making a proper assessment of it. I also want to look into MUFON and who structured it, because I feel like the government infiltrated or modified it at some point, especially during the I forgot the name of the UFO guy that the Air Force gaslit, but gotta add that onto it. So his abduction started in late 1985, and he made a lot of books about it afterwards. What seems that how do I phrase it? I don't know if aliens want to be reported on, but I definitely know people who like MK Ultra acid tapped a man, and then because aliens are real, do want to be reported on, and they do want to see it actively there. It's like a media event, very similar like Roswell, changing like Cold War stuff into media events. And I'm very curious about like restructuring of danger as media events and a restructuring of media events as danger. And I should look into Carlos Castaneda, but that's not here or there at this exact point. I would say that we're looking at a subcultural genesis that came from communion. And this reminds me a lot of Gregor Rocky's film Mysterious Skin, where you see the feeling of wonder and sexuality turn into platonic differences, which is a very, how do I phrase it? It's the demonic angelic structure where it's like you have a higher being and a higher will, but you have a pessimistic body that has an ultimate goal. And structurally, you have to completely use your goal and your origins to get to your redemption. Well, I guess get to your main thing, but it's like your revolution. So you should get to your redemption or structure something. I don't know. I'm going to move along. So this is about the psychic life of Schreiber, not the refutation of aliens or not, because if one person truly does understand what it means to be human, then everybody does become an alien to them. That is something I very specifically deal with because, I don't know, my autism makes me see everything in a very deep way, or just decide that anything that I see doesn't truly matter, but that's like weird parental trauma shit, so yeah. But it seems that he's created a virus for people to put onto his logic and his psychic like inadequacies or weaknesses, and it seems to be used by an empire or an industry. I'm not very sure. Because he doesn't want to be called a advocate for alien contact. He's more like Nick Land, where he claims that he's trying to get in contact to a greater humanity. And it's super weird because he does explain a hypothetical model of aliens and everything, but he's just using it as like a framing device. Like he is a writer. It's very reminds me a lot of what's his name, the dude from Scientology that made it, L. Ron Hubbard, where you use Scientology to you use like a scientific frame to understand spiritual experiences, and then you flattened everything forever in a certain way because it's all just a capitalist sacrifice ritual at a certain point. When you infect real spirituality, sexuality with capital exchange. When Jason Horsley brings up Jung's words of saying it should be said that passing the unconscious contents are by no means exclusively such as were once conscious and by being repressed later grown to unconscious complexes. Quite otherwise, the unconscious has content peculiar to itself, which slowly growing upwards from the depths at last comes into consciousness. So let's say this, very similar to many different concepts, the UFO is a crucial fiction. It is a fiction that allows for the procession of traumas by many different people. I want to bring special attention to like Dan to Dan coming out, Kojima trying to scan a ghost, the dude that made Dan to Dan saying that he saw a UFO and it was horribly designed. The world has become way less satisfying through the imagination now that we are filters of, as people are interconnected through the internet and through like the McLuhan-esque like global village. And so crucial fictions are only crucial for people who need exchange for things to be real, and that is a prior understanding of a lack of faith leading to a collective psychical action in reacting to the purest form of alterity, thus creating a placeholder for a community. So the collective psyche deals with the unknown by turning it into something familiar, using familiar images, words, concepts, and beliefs. These fictions then become real in a particular sense because they generate their own evidence. UFO lore as we know it began at least as far back as 1940s, meaning there are almost no researchers experienced today who didn't grow up in a cultural milieu suffused with such lore via movies, comic books, TV shows, coffee mugs, stuffed toys, pop songs, etc., etc. See, this is kind of what is called database subjectivity, which means that your existence is made by what you have sacrifice and your continual sacrifices, or like the subscription culture that we're in right now. And it is way more about the grand non-narrative structuring the things that you find important than the grand narrative too. But I will have to reference the otaku book for a harder explanation of these things. We belong to these generations who have been conditioned to believe, or at least to the very least want to believe in a UFO. Even those who disbelieve in it believe in something they once believed in as kids, i.e. the idea that UFOs are physical craft from elsewhere, etc. Insofar as a surrogate for the real knowledge and understanding, belief in anything at all is an obstacle of truth. It was first drawn all the way into UFO land by Whitley Strieber in 1987's book Communion. That led me to John Keel and Jake Valet, which I have to look up now. So Jason Horsley has his own quasi memories of alien contact, but he thinks that that's kind of just a word for being molested. Let's just be real. That's what he's trying to say, but I'm not going to deeply dwell on that because I'm more so talking about the idea of fragmentation and trauma, not which fragmentation is more important. Like at a certain point, this is kind of similar to I Have No Mouth and I'm a Scream or Blood Meridian, but for people who are more imaginative than looking for revenge. So big submissives out here. It's hard to say what I believe because, as I say, belief does not take hold of us consciously by choice but through conditioning and as a response to deep unconscious psychological needs. We might even deduce that the only reason we believe in anything is out of a need to do so. If so, then the degree to which we are unconscious of that need determines the degree to which we are enslaved to our beliefs. In other words, the degree in which we take them as certainty or as fact. I should bring that back to Nick Land. So I'm going to think about that through Nick Land today. That's the Prisoner of Infinity of Nick Land's the books that I'm doing right now. So Jason Horsley's position specifically is the UFO and all its manifestations emerges from the human psyche itself and in secondary but no less significant way in and through the body. This is not to dismiss UFO or alien abductions were merely fantasy, however, or even fantasy, because my understanding is more and more is that the psyche and the body are the twin poles of human existence and that to a certain extent everything emerges from them. He quotes Jung in saying, "Does there exist to the psyche anything which we call illusion? What we are pleased to call such may be for the psyche a most important factor of life. Something as indispensable as oxygen for the organism, a psychic actuality of prime importance. Presumably, the psyche does not trouble itself about our categories of reality, and it would therefore be the better part of wisdom for us to say everything is actual. Everything that acts is actual." 1933, page 72 to 73. In other words, consciousness is the context, the only one we have for interpreting the unconscious. Generally, UFO researchers assume that UFO represents a cosmic universal phenomenon that is wholly external rather than allowing it to also be an individual internal event, one that can't be separated from the inner and outer life of the experiencer. Any more than an animal can truly be studied outside of its natural environment. The idea, though, is that it may actually seem radical, doesn't actually go against even more conventional views of the alien as an actual other out there. Because many abduction reports and the nature of the phenomenon itself are highly personal and individual, there are few White House lawn landings in UFO lore, mostly a series of intimate, often one-to-one encounters. If you are at all interested in UFOs, and unless you are a confirmed experiencer, you have probably got most of your information from books, from the other people's testimonies, in other words, from narratives. Yet, the UFO is unknown. Any narrative created around it must go some degree, strip it of its most essential and primary quality, that of being unidentified. It's an unremarked irony of UFOlogy. The term UFO, by being a means of identification, is a misnomer, an oxymoron, a self-canceling description. What does it mean to justify something as unidentified? If what I was dealing with amounted to some sort of deep and instinctual attempt to create a new deity for myself, so remain agnostic was to put the conscious me in interest position to opposing my own unconscious aim. Whitley Strieber, Communion. Very self-aware, almost dysphoria even. It's like being closeted about being human is what I'm hearing at this point. But I'll process through Nick Land within the next video. We still have 6 minutes left. What does it mean to identify something as unidentified, non-binary phenomena, or non-dualism? That's the fuck part about gender. Gender's coming sexuality as a religion, and I get that, but it's just called non-dualism. So, yeah, I don't have to care about it. I just am attached to words for arbitrary meaning. So let's get to the whole core. The principal subject of this book is not UFOs or even socio-religious engineering. The subject of this book is narratives and how and why they are generated. This is the subject of every book, but a subject that's carefully concealed. Most books try to communicate their narratives directly to the reader, so the reader awareness of reading won't interfere with their experience of being absorbed into the narrative. Disbelief may be suspended to the reader's belief can co-generate the narrative. In similar way, we generate an internal narrative by unconsciously erasing the line between what's being thought and what's doing the thinking. We come to believe that we are our thoughts. There's a teaching that if we go deeply enough to any field of knowledge at all, we will understand the total nature of existence. This may go double for UFO. It's a strange attractor, a black hole, for all that compels a researcher to go all the way in and out the other side. It's not possible to really investigate UFO without winding up knee-deep in epistemological and psychological waters. The alternative, which means to drop the really and do it by halves, is simply building upon pre-existing narratives. This is what almost all the UFO books on the market have done. What if they didn't? They probably wouldn't be on the market. How would we even identify them? This book is for the serious UFO investigator and for the experiencer who recognize that there is something ultimately unresolved about their experience, who is willing to question interpretation based passed down to them by the experts and by other experiencers and by their own belief. It is also for anyone interested in how beliefs are created, how they influence our perception and shape the narrative that engender our beliefs, and so on. I delve into the experience and psychology of one high-profile experiencer, not in order of understanding his work, but in order to reach a proper understanding of the phenomena being observed by observing closely the observer himself. He is the author of this exploration. I am also the observer who must be observed. Hence, the seemingly incongruous amount of autobiographical material that seeps into this narrative, since it is only fair to the place my own psychology under the same microscope as I am placed retrievers. Prisoner Infinity takes a psychological approach to the UFO and to abduction phenomena, and even offers a psychological partial explanation for them. But the goal is not to reduce the mystery to mundane terms or to pathologize it. On the contrary, it's to expand and deepen the mystery by presenting a new and more nuanced context for it. It is not only that the UFO mystery can be better understood by applying psychology to it, but that psychology can be seen in new and more truthful light by introducing it to the mystery of the UFO. Above all, Prisoner Infinity attempts to offer an explanation for the UFO mystery that is fantastic and as challenging as our ideas to reality as the phenomenon itself. Simply stated, the understanding of UFO it is necessary to understand ourselves. This means understanding how the narrative of self is created. To think we might be able to understand phenomena as protean and mercurial and resistant to identification of UFO without exploring new ways in the nature of our own perception is like expecting to lean into to swim without getting wet. On the other hand, to seek deeper understanding of the UFO into paranormal spirituality and parapolitical realities, it is to invite a process of inner-outer discovery. It is a process that won't be over until it's over, until we have identified the most unidentified object of all, the human soul. For the soul to be something more than generally required focusing on for the soul to be something more than a generality requires focusing on a specific example. I chose Whitley Strieber not by any conscious process, but because of affinity I felt for this work that went deep and all the way into unconscious levels of my own being. All right, so that is Introduction, Conditioned Belief within Prisoner of Infinity. And that is to say, this is understanding how we manufacture platonic objects to be idols or icons, but as placeholders for structures that is within us in a Kantian sense. But I will be reading Nick Land to process this bit more before I say anything else. I'm going to encode this now.